In the last few minutes, I wanted to talk about some regulation of blood pressure. Okay. So you have two mechanisms, and they are short-term and long-term. Does that make sense? So short-term mechanisms are also known as baroreceptor reflex. And before we move on, I want to say, so first of all, exam is going to be pushed by a week. We're not finishing, and there are some concepts that I really want to go over. Okay, so don't worry about that. Now listen. So your exam is going to be on November 1st. Okay. Now, here's what I want to highlight. Blood pressure is a systemic parameter, just like body temperature or blood pH. So the ultimate goal of your body is to maintain systemic blood pressure at the same level. Does that make sense? Sometimes it has to come at expense of other systems. Are you following me? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Because next class we're going to talk about blood flow, tissue perfusion. So if your body has to choose between maintenance of blood pressure and adequate perfusion of, say, kidneys can go. Does that make sense? If you need to shut down the blood flow to the kidneys in order to maintain blood pressure, so be it. Blood pressure is more important, so to say. So, in baroreceptor reflex, what you start with is some change in the blood pressure. So say you have a low blood pressure, right? Does that make sense? Low blood pressure results. How does low blood pressure alter the stretch of the blood vessels? Elastic blood vessels. If blood pressure is low, are they stretched more or less? Less, of course, right? Less. So this is the mechanical stimulus, so decreased stretch is detected by baroreceptors. Baroreceptors for blood pressure are located in two main locations. Sorry for tautology. So one place is aortic sinus, right about here. So baroreceptors are located in the aorta, and they are located in the carotid sinuses here. Okay? When they sense this reduced stretch, they send the signal to medulla oblongata. Okay, now, what are two ways that you can change? Well, look at this. What are two ways that you can change blood pressure? Look at the formula. How can you increase blood pressure? Increase cardiac output or increase peripheral resistance. Does that make sense? So how do you quickly increase peripheral resistance? Vasoconstriction. Am I clear? So signal stimulates vasomotor center. Okay, and this is the sympathetic response. Am I clear? Now, regarding cardiac output, how can you increase cardiac output? Huh? Okay, you can increase heart rate, or alternatively, what should I put here? What should I put here? Yep, stroke volume. You can either increase heart rate or stroke volume or both, right? And it happens through both. So it stimulates cardioacceleratory center. okay, which is also sympathetic. Does that make sense? Am I clear? And then it inhibits cardioinhibitory center, which is parasympathetic. Is that good? Yep. Don't worry. So let me just go over this one more time. So imagine your blood pressure drops. Okay? For some reason, I don't know. And it's a short-term regulation. Are we clear? So it drops. Decreased blood pressure, lower stretch. Lower stretch, signal to medulla oblongata. In medulla, that signal activates cardioacceleratory and vasomotor centers. And it inhibits cardioinhibitory. Does it make sense? Now, I deliberately put that those two belong to sympathetic. They are activated via sympathetic fibers, and cardioinhibitory is under parasympathetic control. Does that make sense? So essentially, check this out. Look, if you give someone a sympathetic stimulation, say epinephrine, cardioacceleratory center will be stimulated, right? Vasomotor center will be stimulated. Does that make sense? Cardioinhibitory will basically not be affected. If you give someone parasympathetic stimulation, only cardioinhibitory will be sort of under the control. Does that make sense? This is important. I want you to understand. Your blood vessels is practically entirely under sympathetic control. Does that make sense? So vasoconstriction happens when vasomotor center is stimulated. Are you with me? Dilation happens when it is inhibited. When this stimulation of it is reduced. Am I clear? Okay? So, let's play some scenarios. First of all, what happens when blood pressure goes up? Stretch increases. That goes to medulla oblongata, right? What happens to cardioacceleratory centers? They get inhibited. Vasomotor inhibited, which results in vasodilation. Cardioinhibitory, opposite, stimulated. So, now this is important, something also important. Look at cardioacceleratory. I'm going to put some outcomes here. Increased heart rate and increased contractility. Does that make sense? Cardioinhibitory center, which is parasympathetic, only controls heart rate. Okay, so heart rate only. Does that make sense? So if your blood pressure goes up, look what happens. Stretch goes up. That signals to the medulla. Cardioacceleratory center is inhibited, which reduces heart rate and reduces contractility. Vasomotor center is inhibited. Does that make sense? Which dilates blood vessels. And cardioinhibitory is stimulated, which only affects heart rate. Am I clear? Does that make sense to you all? Excellent. Now, one question that I have. I'm gonna turn off the recordings.